Substance abuse has taken too many rock stars from us way too soon, but sometimes just choosing the wrong seat can prove to be a fatal decision. Soundgarden and Audioslave frontman Chris Cornell was on tour when he killed himself in a Detroit hotel on May 18, 2017. He was only 52. His family and fans were shocked, as there didn't seem to be any warning signs. On the contrary, the last year of his life was full of creative endeavors that he was excited about. His widow Vicky revealed on Gayle King's SiriusXM show, "This was not on the radar. This was not like, oh, we have to deal with this in any sort of way." Chris did not suffer suicidal ideation, and Chris was not even depressed. Chris was in recovery. It came from nowhere.
My husband was the furthest thing from a rock star junkie. He just wasn't.
Those who saw Cornell just hours before he died didn't see any obvious warning signs either. His gig that night went very well, and he even shouted to the crowd during the encore, "I feel sorry for the next place we play, but we don't have the same expectations." In 2021, Cornell's family settled a lawsuit with a doctor whom they alleged overprescribed drugs to the musician. Scott Weiland was best known as the frontman of Stone Temple Pilots and Velvet Revolver, but he was touring with his new group, Scott Weiland and the Wildabouts, when he died from an accidental overdose before a show in Minnesota on December 3, 2015, at the age of 48. He was nearly broke when he died, which explains why he was touring in the first place. A year earlier, he told the Lebanon Daily News, "It's just astounding that rock records don't sell. They don't sell the way they used to. I never would have imagined that would be the case. But it is the case. It puts a lot on you to tour." But being on the road wasn't necessarily a good thing for Weiland, who was kicked out of Stone Temple Pilots for his unreliability. He admitted to Loudwire, "I had an issue with being late to shows. I can admit that. And it's not just shows. I've always had a problem with it, and my friends call it living on Weiland time." The touring lifestyle may have also made it difficult for Weiland to stay clean. The year before he died, he claimed he'd been sober for 13 years, but that clearly changed in the intervening time. Dimebag Darrell Abbott was best known as the founding guitarist of metal band Pantera, but he was touring with his new band Damageplan when he was killed on stage in 2004. According to witnesses, the gig that night in Columbus, Ohio was initially going well. One fan told Rolling Stone, "Dime was doing his thing. He gets really into it, so he was blindsided." A man named Nathan Gale had been seen hanging around and acting weird before the band took the stage. Then during the show, he opened fire with his pistol. A security guard recalled, "I thought they were playing a big gimmick. People were pumping their fists thinking it was a hoax."
Everybody started scattering, there's mayhem everywhere.
Once it became clear what was actually happening, people jumped into action. An off-duty nurse performed CPR on Abbott, while an off-duty police officer shot Gale, who managed to kill 3 other people that night. Guitarist Randy Rhoads helped define Ozzy Osbourne's sound when the latter went solo after leaving Black Sabbath, but their time together was cut tragically short. On March 19, 1982, Osbourne and Rhoads parked at a house with a small airstrip in Leesburg, Florida. Their bus driver, Andrew Aycock, had an expired pilot's license, and he decided to take several members of the crew on some joyrides in the small plane. With Rhoads and the band's seamstress, Rachel Youngblood, on board, Aycock made 3 low passes in an attempt to buzz past the tour bus. Then, on their 4th pass, the plane collided with the rear of the bus, and the resulting crash killed all 3 of them. Rhoads was only 25.
After the 4th pass, he tipped the bus on the opposite side and it nosedived into the home.
It's unclear why Rhoads even agreed to go in the plane in the first place, since he was reportedly afraid of flying. The incident left Osbourne haunted for decades. In 2018, he told Rolling Stone, "To this day, as I'm talking to you now, I'm back in that field looking at this plane wreck and a house on fire. You never get over something like that. You're in shock." Dave Williams was the lead singer for metal band Drowning Pool on their platinum-selling debut album Sinner, which came out in 2001. The following year, the band was promoted to a permanent spot on Ozfest's main stage. On August 13th, Ozfest played a stop in Indiana, and everything seemed fine. Williams was found dead in his bunk on the tour bus the next day. He was only 30. His death was initially thought to be alcohol-related, but that explanation didn't sit right with some of the people who were actually with Williams that night. Ultimately, an autopsy revealed that he died of an undiagnosed heart condition, and no drugs or alcohol were involved. Cliff Burton served as the bassist for Metallica from 1982 to 1986. The band's 3rd album, Master of Puppets, was a massive hit when it came out in '86, so their label had them support it with a huge world tour. On the night of September 26, 1986, the band was driving through Sweden on their tour bus. While the band members were sleeping, their bus veered off the road. Burton was thrown from the vehicle before it fell on top of him.
I heard everyone screaming except for Cliff.
During rescue efforts, the crane lifting the bus slipped and it fell on Burton again. By the time he was extricated, he was already dead. He was only 24. Soon thereafter, Metallica's manager Peter Mensch urged them to continue the tour. Frontman James Hetfield recalled, "Peter came out and said, 'Get your therapy out through your music. Jump right back on the horse and ride on.' We couldn't believe this guy was telling us this. What do you mean, man? This is our buddy. Screw you." It took us a few days to grasp the concept of that kind of strength. Cliff's wishes were, battle on, friends. Ultimately, Burton's bandmates did decide to continue the tour. Lynyrd Skynyrd frontman Ronnie Van Zant seemingly predicted his own tragic death on multiple occasions.
Ronnie and I were in Tokyo, Japan, and Ronnie told me that he would never live to see 30, and that he was going to go out with his boots on, in other words, on the road.
Skynyrd had played 5 shows on their 1977 tour of the Survivors when they chartered a plane in South Carolina to take them to their next show in Louisiana. The craft had been used by other bands before and was known to be unsafe, but this didn't seem to bother Van Zant. Guitarist Gary Rossington told Rolling Stone, "Ronnie said, 'Hey, if the Lord wants you to die on this plane, when it's your time, it's your time. Let's go, man. We've got a gig to do.'" Van Zant's words proved prophetic when the plane ran out of fuel near the end of the flight. It crashed in Mississippi, killing 6 people, including 29-year-old Van Zant and 28-year-old Steve Gaines. 20 others survived, although all but one of them suffered major injuries.
I woke up in a swamp hearing all my brothers crying or screaming, because they were hurt and it was natural or dead.
Shannon Hoon was the lead singer of alternative rock band Blind Melon, best known for their 1993 hit No Rain. In 1995, the band was on tour promoting their sophomore album Soup, which wasn't selling quite as well as their debut. Guitarist Christopher Thorne told Louder, "We were having a lot of fun because we were playing and seeing the country, but I think we were a bit stressed out. We didn't realize that you actually had to work a record." Hoon had been abusing drugs for years by that point, and touring didn't help the situation. Guitarist Brad Smith recalled, "He'd made a mess of himself on the road after a certain point, and we should have gotten off the road sooner, but these great tours kept coming up, and the managers were convincing members that we should take advantage of this." Despite a recent stint in rehab and the presence of a drug counselor on the tour, Hoon was unable to stay clean. On October 21st, he was found dead on the tour bus in New Orleans after suffering a heart attack caused by a cocaine overdose. He was only 28. Rick Nelson was one of the first rock and roll stars of the 1950s. Introduced to America as Ricky on the sitcom The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, he released a string of hit songs before fading away from the spotlight in the 60s. In 1985, Nelson was in the midst of a small comeback tour. He had purchased an older plane to get from gig to gig, but it suffered from constant mechanical problems. It needed work again before takeoff on December 31st. Nelson had played a gig in Alabama the night before, but he and his band were scheduled to play that night at a New Year's Eve event in Dallas and were under intense pressure to make it there. The plane eventually took off, but then a fire forced an emergency landing, which led to a crash in a cow pasture less than 2 miles from a landing strip.
I looked out the window, and here's the airplane in our pasture, and it's on fire.
Nelson and 6 others died, while 2 crew members survived. He was only 45. February 3, 1959 has gone down in history as the day the music died. That was when Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, better known as the Big Bopper, died in a plane crash along with their pilot Roger Peterson. The musicians were halfway through their 24-show Winter Dance Party tour when their plane went down in a field in Iowa. They'd previously been traveling between gigs on a bus, but it kept breaking down, so that night they decided to take a small plane instead. A fan named Nancy Ransom Girardi was in the audience at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa for what ended up being their final show. She later recalled, "It was particularly crowded that night. You could wander up close to the stage and see them pretty well. When the news broke, the weight of the tragedy was understandably difficult to process. As Girardi put it, you just couldn't believe it. You knew for the rest of your life you would remember that you were there." Eddie Cochran was one of the original American rock and roll stars and one of the first to tour the United Kingdom in 1960. That tour went so well that what was originally supposed to be a 12-day run alongside Gene Vincent ended up being extended to 20 weeks. This change in plans necessitated a break in the middle of the run. And so, after a show in Bristol on April 16th, Cochran, Vincent, their tour manager Patrick Tompkins, and singer-songwriter Sharon Sheely hopped into a taxi to London to catch a plane to Los Angeles. Sheely was dating Cochran at the time, and she remembers thinking that the driver was going way too fast. And indeed, while tearing through the small town of Chippingham, they ended up crashing. Most of them survived with only minor injuries, except for Cochran, who was gravely injured when he was thrown from the car. He died the following day in the hospital at the age of just 21. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.